Troy Bramston is a man who, of course, we love to our bootstraps. For as long as we've had a show, we've given him an opportunity to give us his views about the politics, and obviously his great experience inside the Labor Party has been fascinating over the years. And we spoke to him when he wrote the definitive book about the dismissal of Gough Whitlam, and now his latest work is the definitive book about Bob Hawke. Bob Hawke, who of course died in 2019. Well, Troy has put together a book which is out now through Penguin called Demons and Destiny, the definitive biography. The great man, Troy Bramston, talking about Bob Hawke, and we started by talking about his legacy.
I think Prime Ministers always have to make compromises, but Bob Hawke certainly saw his task as bringing the nation together. That was his manifesto, essentially, for government in 1983 after the division and confrontation in the Whitlam and Fraser years. And he did that. He did that with the Accord by having the unions work with government to moderate wage rises. And he did lead a very talented cabinet and was able to let ministers run their own portfolios, rarely intervened. And he managed to bring the Labor Party through a period of profound change. I mean, we all know the landmark economic reforms, whether it's the float of the dollar or dismantling the tariff wall or the privatisations, but also some pretty significant social and environmental policies as well, whether it's Medicare or the Sex Discrimination Act, which made things more equal for women, or the big environmental achievements like saving the Daintree or Kakadu. All these things were difficult, but he could only achieve them by having people work with him and to make those sort of compromises. So, yes, he used the kind of transactional tools, I guess, any political leader did, but in the end, he produced transformative policy change, and the Australian people respected him and I think admired him for that.
Now, obviously, in the final run of his prime ministership, ultimately, the ego of others ends up taking the prime ministership away from him. But for the bulk of his prime ministership, how important is it to understanding the success of Hawke as Prime Minister that he had titans around the cabinet table? Obviously, he had Keating on the economy, he had Richo who could fix anything, and you name it all in between. Compare that to most governments that we've seen since. There's the odd star here or there, there's the odd head kicker in question time, but it seems like Hawke had that particular moment in time. Howard probably again, in the first few years of his time, but it seemed like the cabinet was full of people, any one of which could have been a Prime Minister.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this was Bill Hayden's great gift to Bob Hawke. Of course, there was a leadership change on the eve of the 1983 election, and in the book I reveal actual letters that Bob Hawke and Bill Hayden signed to facilitate that leadership change that haven't been made public before. But Bill Hayden had remade the Labor Party, had overhauled the front bench, he'd recruited new candidates, he developed new policies, and so this was a gift to Bob Hawke when he came into government. And there were some big titans around that cabinet table. When I interviewed Paul Keating for the book, he said that he was like a managing director and Keating was the chairman, and Hawke was the chairman of the board. And there are other big figures there, Susan Ryan, the first Labor female cabinet minister, Peter Walsh, the finance minister, Lionel Bowen, the deputy prime minister. There's Kim Beazley and Gareth Evans and Richo and all these figures throughout the years that were very, very significant. And so Hawke had a great ability to manage that team, not be domineering, but work collaboratively and consultatively with these figures and get the best out of them. Now, it sounds easy, but, as we've seen in recent decades, it's actually harder than it looks. This is actually the art of governing. And so I spent a long time in the book writing about how Hawke accepted frank and fearless advice, worked with his cabinet, appointed a talented staff, paid attention to the actual process of governing to make sure that you get things done.
Now, my last question you may well have just answered, but as a bloke who puts in such meticulous research and always uncovers anything, and all of your books have done this, what is the smallest little tidbit or the piece of paper that you're most proud of that you were able to unearth and get published?
Well, look, there's a lot of documents. I mean, to be honest, I looked at something like 1 million pages of new archival documents for this book, Paul. I mean, it was just a mammoth effort. But one of the things I got access to, which may surprise people, is Bob Hawke kept a number of diaries as a very young man, in his early 20s and in his teen years. And he went on a student Christian conference to India in 1952. And in that diary, he wrote about his departure from organised religion. He lost the faith because he had seen so much widespread poverty in India. And then there was another diary just shortly after that where he's on his way to Oxford University to begin as a Rhodes Scholar. And the ship that he was on stopped off in South Africa. And he witnessed the brutal apartheid regime there, which set white South Africans against black. And then he wrote in his own hand, in this sort of cramped scrawl, that there will one day be a day of reckoning in South Africa. This is 1953. And then, 20, 25 years later, he's one of the world leaders in the global campaign to end apartheid. So you sort of get a shiver up your spine as a biographer when you find that kind of moment in an archival document, and you know it's vested with future significance.